Good morning, beloved souls. We arrive at this morning carrying quiet battles, some we name, many we do not. We call them weakness. We whisper the word as if it were a flaw, as if it were shameful. But today we pause long enough to listen for a deeper truth. What if your weakness is not a failure of faith, but a classroom for it? What if God in divine wisdom is shaping strength not through comfort, but through the trembling places of your life? God has never wasted a tear, never ignored a weary heart. In the soft hours of the morning, when the world is still and our masks fall away, God meets us not with judgment, but with purpose. This prayer is for those moments when you feel small, unsure, and tired. This is a prayer for strength that rises not from pride, but from surrender. Today, we will learn that weakness is not the end of the story. It is often the beginning of transformation. There comes a moment in every life when the mirror tells a quieter truth than the world ever has. In that moment, you are no longer performing strength for applause or survival. You are simply standing there, bare of excuses, aware of the ache in your bones and the unanswered questions resting heavy in your chest. You call it weakness. You name it failure. You wonder how you arrived here when you prayed so earnestly to be delivered somewhere else. But listen, lean in close to the stillness of this truth. What you are experiencing is not an accident. It is not divine neglect. It is not a cruel oversight. It is intention wrapped in mystery, purpose disguised as fragility. We live in a world that teaches us to praise the unbreakable, to applaud the tireless, to celebrate those who never bend. From the time we learn to walk, we are taught to stand tall, speak confidently, and hide our trembling hands. Strength becomes a performance and weakness becomes a secret. We tuck it away like a letter we are afraid to read. Yet God, in a wisdom older than mountains and gentler than morning light, does not operate by the standards of applause. God does not confuse noise with power, nor silence with defeat. God works in places we overlook, in spaces we rush past, in the fragile chambers of the human heart. Your weakness did not sneak into your life through an unlocked door. It was not smuggled in by bad luck or poor timing. It was allowed carefully, deliberately, because there are lessons that cannot be learned in comfort, truths that refuse to bloom in ease. Some revelations require the soil of struggle. Some strengths are born only when the illusion of control has been stripped away. There is a holy intelligence at work in the moments when you feel least capable. When your plans unravel, when your certainty dissolves, when your hands are empty and your voice feels small, God is not absent. God is attentive, watching, teaching, shaping you into someone who knows the difference between pride and power, between ego and endurance. Weakness slows us down. It forces us to sit where we would rather run, to feel what we would rather numb, to listen where we would rather speak. And in that slowing, something sacred happens. You begin to notice how much of your life was powered by your own striving. How often you said, "I've got this," without ever asking if you were meant to carry it alone. Weakness interrupts the illusion of self-sufficiency and introduces the grace of dependence. There is a tenderness to this process, though it may not feel tender at first. Like a potter pressing firm hands into soft clay, the shaping can feel uncomfortable, even painful. But the pressure is purposeful. God presses not to break you, but to form you, to make room for a strength that does not originate in your own limited reserves. A strength that does not boast, does not bruise others, does not collapse when applause fades. When you are weak, you are more honest. You stop pretending to be invincible. You stop measuring your worth by how much you can endure alone. You begin to tell the truth to yourself, to God, sometimes to others. And truth is fertile ground. Truth is where healing starts. Truth is where transformation takes root. Consider how often the most meaningful prayers are born not from triumph, but from trembling. Not from abundance, but from need. Weakness opens the door to prayers that are raw, unpolished, and real. Prayers that do not impress anyone but heaven. In those prayers you are not performing faith, you are practicing it. You are not reciting strength, you are receiving it. God knows that unchecked strength can harden into arrogance, that uninterrupted success can shrink compassion, that constant winning can make us forget how to kneel. So sometimes God introduces weakness not as punishment, but as protection. Protection from becoming someone who forgets where help comes from. Protection from believing the lie that you are the source of your own salvation. There is also a quiet equality in weakness. It reminds us that no matter how high we climb, how polished our image, how impressive our resume, we are all human, breathing borrowed air, living on borrowed time, sustained by borrowed grace. Weakness levels the ground beneath our feet. It teaches humility not as humiliation, but as clarity. You see yourself accurately, not as nothing, but not as everything either. And in that clarity, love grows deeper. Compassion widens. You become gentler with others because you have learned what it feels like to need mercy. You stop rushing to judge because you remember how it felt to be uncertain, afraid, undone. Weakness carves out space for empathy, and empathy is one of the truest signs of strength. God is intentional even in the timing of your weakness. It often arrives when you think you are ready to soar on your own wings, when you believe you have finally mastered the art of surviving without help. That is when God whispers, "Come closer," not to scold, but to remind you that closeness, not independence, is the goal. God desires relationship, not performance. Trust, not theatrics. A heart that leans, not a soul that boasts. You may ask, why me? But a better question might be, what is this preparing me for? Because weakness has a way of training the spirit. It builds patience in a world addicted to speed. It cultivates faith in a culture obsessed with certainty. It teaches endurance that does not shout but lasts. One day you will look back on this season not with bitterness but with understanding. You will see how the very thing you begged God to remove was the thing that taught you how to listen, how to pray, how to wait, how to trust. You will recognize that your weakness was not a detour, it was the road. And when strength returns, as it always does, it will not look the same. It will be quieter, steadier, rooted. It will not need to announce itself. It will simply show up again and again, faithful and resilient. A strength that knows where it came from. So if today you feel weak, do not rush to fix it. Do not shame yourself for it. Do not assume God has forgotten your name. Stand still long enough to realize that something sacred is happening. God is at work not despite your weakness, but through it, shaping you into someone who knows that true power does not come from never falling, but from learning who holds you when you do. And that, dear heart, is no accident at all. There is a particular kind of silence that arrives when your own strength has reached its limit. It is not the peaceful silence of rest, nor the satisfying quiet of work well done. It is the stillness that comes when effort has been exhausted and answers have not arrived. In that silence, the soul begins to understand something it resisted for a long time. You were never meant to do this alone. We are taught early to admire independence, to stand on our own feet, to make our own way, to prove again and again that we are capable, reliable, strong. And there is dignity in that striving. Yes. But there is also a danger. Because when independence hardens into isolation, when self-reliance becomes self-worship, we forget the truth of our design. We were created not as islands, but as vessels, not as sources, but as receivers. Weakness has a way of interrupting our rehearsed speeches of confidence. It loosens our grip on control and asks a question we have avoided. What will you do when you can no longer carry yourself? In that question, God is not condemning you. God is inviting you to lean, inviting you to trust, inviting you to remember where your help has always come from. Dependence is a word we often misunderstand. We associate it with failure, with immaturity, with lack. But spiritual dependence is not weakness of character, it is clarity of spirit. It is the recognition that breath itself is a gift, that strength is borrowed, that tomorrow is promised by grace, not guaranteed by effort. Weakness teaches us this lesson not through lectures but through lived experience. When you are strong, you pray with structure. When you are weak, you pray with surrender. The language changes, the tone softens, the heart opens. You stop explaining yourself to God and start offering yourself instead. Help me becomes a complete prayer. I need you becomes an act of faith. In weakness, you learn the difference between asking God to bless your plans and asking God to guide your steps. You realize how often you invited God to follow you instead of allowing yourself to be led. Dependence rearranges the relationship. God is no longer a backup plan or an emergency contact. God becomes the foundation. There is humility in this realization, but it is not humiliating, it is freeing. Because once you admit you cannot do it alone, you no longer have to pretend that you can. The burden of performance falls away. The exhausting work of proving yourself loses its power. You rest, not because the journey is over, but because you are no longer carrying it by yourself. Weakness also sharpens your listening. When your own strength is loud, it drowns out the quieter voice of wisdom. But when you are weak, you begin to notice subtle guidance. A nudge here, a pause there, a door closing that once terrified you, now gently redirecting your path. Dependence tunes the ear of the soul. God often waits for this moment, not because God withholds help, but because God honors choice. As long as you insist on being self-made, self-sustained, self-sufficient, God allows you that illusion. But when weakness cracks it open, when you finally look up instead of inward, God is already there, not rushing, not scolding, simply present. There is an intimacy that comes with dependence, a closeness that strength alone cannot produce. When you depend on God, prayer becomes conversation, not ceremony. Faith becomes relationship, not ritual. You begin to recognize God not only in miracles but in moments, in endurance, in daily bread, in the strength to get up again after disappointment has knocked you down. Dependence also teaches patience. When you cannot fix everything immediately, you learn how to wait without despair, how to trust without timelines, how to believe without visible proof. Weakness slows your pace enough for faith to deepen its roots, and roots, unlike flowers, grow best in the dark. In depending on God, you begin to understand that strength does not always mean relief. Sometimes it means resilience. Sometimes it means peace in the middle of uncertainty. Sometimes it means standing when you expected to collapse. Dependence shifts your definition of victory. You stop measuring success by outcomes and start measuring it by obedience. There is also courage in dependence. It takes bravery to admit need in a world that rewards self-sufficiency. It takes faith to lean on God when you cannot see how things will turn out. Weakness does not remove courage. It reveals it. The courage to trust. The courage to hope. The courage to believe that God's strength is sufficient, even when yours is not. As you learn dependence, your pride softens. You stop comparing your journey to others. You stop resenting those who appear stronger or more successful. You recognize that everyone is leaning on something. Some lean on money, some on status, some on applause. You choose to lean on God, and that choice steadies you. Dependence also prepares you to receive help from others. Weakness teaches you that accepting support is not a burden to those who give it. It is a gift you allow them to offer. In this way, dependence deepens community. It weaves connection. It reminds us that love was always meant to be shared. Over time, you begin to notice something surprising. The more you depend on God, the stronger you become, not in the way you expected, but in the way you needed. You become steady instead of frantic, grounded instead of defensive, hopeful instead of hardened. This strength does not shout. It endures. You discover that God's strength does not replace your humanity. It sustains it. You are still tired sometimes, still uncertain, still learning. But you are no longer alone in those places. Dependence does not erase struggle. It redeems it. It transforms weakness into a meeting place between heaven and earth. One day, you will speak of this season not as the time you almost broke, but as the time you finally learned how to lean, how to trust without conditions, how to let God be God. You will see that dependence did not make you smaller, it made you truer. So if today you feel unable to carry what is before you, do not be afraid. This is not the end of your strength. It is the beginning of your dependence. And in that sacred leaning you will discover a power far greater than your own, the quiet, faithful strength of a God who has been waiting all along. There is a certain beauty in fragility, though the world often fails to see it. The world celebrates the strong, the unshakable, the polished. But God often chooses to work in the broken, the vulnerable, the fragile vessels of human life. There is a divine paradox here that we must learn to embrace. It is in our weakness, in our trembling, in our moments of utter helplessness, that the fullest measure of God's strength becomes visible. When you fall apart, when you cannot find the next step, when your voice trembles and your hands shake, do not despair. This is not a mark of failure. This is not a sign that God has turned away. It is a sacred opportunity, a holy invitation for God's power to enter the empty spaces that you can no longer fill yourself. You see, strength is not measured by how much you can carry, but by how willing you are to receive what you cannot create alone. God does not reveal his strength in those who are invincible or unyielding. God does not need the proud to display power. It is the fragile heart, the uncertain soul, the person at the edge of their endurance, where divine strength shines with unmistakable clarity. When we admit that we cannot do it, we open the door for God to do it through us. When we bow our heads, we allow heaven to lift us. When we confess our limitations, we make room for limitless power. Consider the human body, so delicate, so susceptible to disease, fatigue, and time. Yet in the fragility of our flesh, there is the capacity for miracles. In the trembling hand, God works a precision that defies human understanding. In the faltering voice, God speaks words that echo across generations. In the weary heart, God plants hope that cannot be broken. Fragility is not weakness in God's eyes. It is the canvas upon which strength is painted. It is in the story of suffering, the narrative of struggle, that God's power becomes evident. Look at those who have endured hardship beyond imagination, and yet they rise again and again. Not because their human strength is inexhaustible, but because God's strength flows through their fragile veins, steadying them, guiding them, sustaining them when all else has failed. When we think we have nothing left, God's presence reveals that we have everything we need. Fragility humbles us, and humility prepares us for the work of God. There is no room for pride when the foundation beneath you feels like it is crumbling. There is no pretense possible when the walls you built collapse. In these moments, God's strength is not only revealed, it is magnified. Every tear, every tremor, every whispered prayer becomes a vessel for His glory. The more fragile we are, the more space there is for God to demonstrate that strength is not ours alone. It is His working in and through us. Human fragility forces us to confront our limitations. We are forced to acknowledge that we cannot always fix what is broken, cannot always carry what is heavy, cannot always provide the answers we wish we could. And in that confrontation, a remarkable transformation occurs. We begin to see that strength is not about control. Strength is not about dominance. Strength is about reliance. Strength is about surrendering our insufficiency so that God's sufficiency may shine. Prayer becomes particularly powerful in our fragile moments. When we are at our lowest, when our voices shake, when our hearts are heavy, prayer flows naturally from a place of honesty. There is no pretense, no need to impress anyone. And it is in that honest prayer, that raw appeal to heaven, that God's strength enters and fills what we cannot. Fragility gives birth to intimacy with the divine. Our weakness becomes the channel, and God's power becomes the current. Consider the fragile shoots of a plant breaking through concrete. They appear delicate, tiny, insufficient, but they hold the life force within them, and in their persistence the strength of creation itself is revealed. So too with human fragility. When we feel delicate, when our spirit seems barely able to carry us, the strength of God rises to meet us. And in that meeting we realize that fragility is not the opposite of strength. It is the instrument through which strength becomes visible. Human fragility also cultivates empathy. When we have known weakness, we can recognize it in others. When we have felt powerless, we can see it in the hearts around us. And in that recognition, we become instruments of God's strength for others. Our fragility becomes the bridge through which compassion flows and through which divine strength moves in the world. God's strength is revealed in the patient endurance of fragile souls. It is revealed in the courage of those who continue when their bodies ache, when their hearts are heavy, when their minds doubt. It is revealed in the perseverance of those who cannot see the finish line, but continue to step forward anyway. Fragility does not prevent action. It channels it, guided by divine power. The moments when we feel most fragile are often the moments when God's strength is most evident. A single act of patience, a quiet word of encouragement, a gentle touch, these come from a source far greater than our own. And when we witness these moments, we see clearly that strength is not ours alone. It is the fusion of human vulnerability and divine intervention, a sacred collaboration that changes the world. Fragility teaches us the value of trust. When we are vulnerable, when we are exposed, we are forced to rely on God in ways we might otherwise avoid. We learn that trust is not blind. It is informed by experience, tempered by surrender, and deepened by reliance. When we lean into our fragility, God's strength carries us, and our faith grows. And so, human fragility becomes a testament to God's glory. Every tear, every trembling hand, every faltering step is an opportunity for divine strength to be revealed. In weakness, power is made visible. In humility, courage shines. In surrender, resilience rises. Our fragility does not diminish us. It magnifies God. As we embrace our fragile moments, we begin to understand that true strength is not measured by what we can do alone, but by what God can do through us. The strongest among us are not those who never break, but those who in breaking allow God to hold them. They are those who in admitting their insufficiency discover the sufficiency of heaven. God's strength is patient. It waits in the quiet corners of our fragility, ready to emerge. It is steady in our storms. It is gentle in our trembling. It is undeniable in the spaces where we feel weakest. And when we finally recognize it, we understand that our fragility was never a limitation. It was the stage, the canvas, the sacred vessel through which God's power could shine. So when your heart feels fragile, when your body feels weak, when your mind feels uncertain, do not despair. This is not the end of strength. This is the revelation of it. God's strength is being made perfect through your human frailty. Your trembling becomes the trumpet. Your weakness becomes the witness. Your fragility becomes the proof that power does not always roar. It often whispers, it often sustains, it often carries what we cannot carry ourselves. And one day when you look back on these fragile moments, you will see with clarity the beauty of the paradox. You will see that the times you felt weakest were the times when God's strength was most brilliantly revealed. You will see that fragility was never a flaw, but a doorway. And you will stand whole and steadfast, not by your own might, but by the invisible, undeniable, unfailing strength of God working through your human heart. In the tapestry of life, fragility threads through every pattern, every stitch, every color. And through it all, God's strength is revealed not in spite of our weakness, but because of it. Our fragile moments are not to be feared. They are sacred. They are holy. They are the places where heaven touches earth and strength rises, quiet and unyielding, through our human hearts. There is a sacred hush that arrives in the morning, a silence that carries with it both promise and possibility. It is not merely the turning of the clock nor the rising of the sun. It is a gentle invitation. It is the world itself pausing to remember that each day is a gift, a canvas upon which the divine can paint hope, courage, and renewal. Morning prayer is the sacred doorway into that day, the soft whisper of intention, the grounding of the heart before it races into the demands of life. It is in these quiet hours that strength is aligned, not conjured, not forced, but drawn from the eternal wellspring of God's presence. When the first light of day touches your face, it is more than sunlight. It is a reminder that the world is beginning again, that life has not abandoned you, that mercy is waiting at your doorstep. To pray in the morning is to claim that truth for yourself. It is to stand in humility and say, I cannot face this day on my own, but I can face it with you. It is the admission of dependence, the acknowledgement of fragility, and the embracing of divine companionship. In those moments, the heart begins to realign. The scattered pieces of yesterday's worries, fears, and regrets are gathered into a posture of surrender and readiness. Morning prayer teaches the soul discipline and devotion. It is not a hurried muttering over breakfast or a distracted plea while scrolling through the news. It is a deliberate act, a sacred pause, a turning toward the source of strength before the world's noise asserts itself. In that pause, the heart remembers that power is not measured by how much we accomplish, but by how faithfully we align ourselves with God's will. Strength grows quietly here in the soil of intention, watered by the sincerity of unhurried devotion. When you rise to pray in the morning, you are making a declaration. You are saying that this day will not control you, you will control your heart. You are saying that your strength will not be borrowed solely from human reserves which are finite, but from the infinite. You are proclaiming that you will meet the day with courage, not because you are invincible, but because you are willing to be filled with the power that comes from above. Morning prayer is not about changing circumstances, it is about changing the heart to meet circumstances with grace. Consider the stillness of early morning, the world wrapped in soft shadows and quiet light. It is here in the hush before the bustle that your soul can breathe. Here you can speak to God without interruption, without expectation, without performance. Here honesty flows freely and vulnerability becomes strength. Here your whispered needs, your hidden fears, your fragile hopes are received without judgment. And in this sacred exchange, strength is cultivated, not by effort but by alignment, not by striving but by surrender. The power of morning prayer lies in its consistency. Each day offers the opportunity to return, to reset, to realign. Just as the sun rises without fail, so too does the heart find renewal when it greets God first. This is the rhythm of spiritual resilience. Morning prayer anchors the soul before the winds of the day scatter it. It strengthens the heart before trials appear. It fills the spirit before responsibilities demand attention. It is a sacred training ground where endurance is practiced and faith is fortified. Through morning prayer, you learn patience. You learn that strength is not instantaneous, that courage is not always loud, that endurance is cultivated, not commanded. You discover that when you pause to align your heart with God, the storms of the day lose their ability to unseat you. Challenges do not disappear, but your ability to meet them does. Your eyes, trained on the eternal rather than the temporal, see opportunity where others see only obstacles. Your heart, filled with quiet assurance, beats steadily even in the chaos that may follow. Morning prayer also nurtures gratitude, and gratitude is the root of true strength. When you begin the day acknowledging the gifts already present, the breath in your lungs, the roof over your head, the presence of loved ones, the unseen mercies, you cultivate a spirit of abundance rather than scarcity. Strength grows not from what is taken from you, but from what you recognize has always been given. Gratitude opens the heart, and an open heart is capable of receiving God's power fully. There is a transformative intimacy in morning prayer. It is in these early hours that you converse with God without distraction, without the interruptions of duty or demand. You confess your limitations, you voice your desires, you whisper your hopes. And God answers, not always in words, but in the alignment of your spirit, the fortitude in your step, the clarity in your mind. This intimacy builds strength because it reminds you daily that you are not alone. You are never alone. The power that meets you in prayer carries you, sustains you, and equips you to face what lies ahead. Morning prayer also prepares the heart to act rightly in the world. When we begin the day aligned with God's purpose, our decisions carry wisdom. Our words carry compassion. Our actions carry intention. Strength is not merely endurance, it is guided by discernment. It is tempered by love. It is wielded with humility. And this kind of strength rooted in prayer is unshakable because it flows from the eternal rather than the ephemeral. When the world demands much, and it will, morning prayer becomes a shield, not a shield that removes difficulty, but one that fortifies the spirit. You carry with you the calm certainty that comes from having begun the day in sacred alignment. Obstacles may rise, but they meet a heart anchored. Temptations may call, but they encounter discernment. Confusion may swirl, but clarity has already been received. In this way, morning prayer is not a ritual of escape. It is a rehearsal of strength. There is also a contagious quality to this practice. A heart fortified in prayer radiates resilience to those around it. Your patience touches those who are impatient. Your calm steadies those who are anxious. Your courage encourages those who falter. Strength aligned in the morning becomes a gift to the world, not just to yourself. When your day begins in sacred communion, you carry a power that speaks louder than words, that acts with greater impact than effort alone. Morning prayer reminds us that strength is not always external. It does not reside in muscle, in wealth, in accolades, or in recognition. True strength is internal, spiritual, and eternal. It is cultivated in the quiet hours before the world demands its attention. It is nurtured in conversation with the one who knows all things. It is revealed in the alignment of heart, mind, and spirit before challenges arise. And it is sustained by the constant return to that sacred moment, again and again each morning. In this practice, we learn patience, perseverance, and perspective. We learn that life will continue to unfold whether we are prepared or not, but we can choose to begin each day in alignment with the source of all power. We learn that we do not carry the weight of the day alone, and we learn that the small intentional act of morning prayer has the capacity to shape the hours, the choices, and the outcomes that follow. Morning prayer is both foundation and fortification. It is a statement of faith, a declaration of dependence, and a proclamation of trust. It teaches us to stand, not because we are invincible, but because we are equipped. It teaches us to speak, not because our words are sufficient, but because they are guided. It teaches us to act, not because we are alone, but because God walks with us. And in this alignment, true strength is born. So rise early, speak honestly, listen deeply. Align your heart before the sun climbs high and the day demands its toll. Make morning prayer not an obligation, but a sanctuary. Let it be the place where weakness is transformed into readiness, where fear is met with courage, where uncertainty is steadied by divine assurance. And as the day unfolds, carry that strength quietly but unwaveringly. For the heart that begins each morning in prayer is a heart that has already been prepared. It is a heart that knows it will not face the world alone. It is a heart that carries within it the calm power of the divine. And it is through this sacred alignment that every trial becomes an opportunity, every burden becomes a lesson, every challenge becomes a stage for the revelation of strength. Morning prayer does not simply start the day, it fortifies it. It does not merely whisper to the soul, it awakens it. And it does not only invite God's presence, it opens the heart to be transformed by it, to be carried by it, and to act through it. Through morning prayer, our spirits are strengthened, our steps are guided, and our hearts are aligned to the source of all power, all courage, all hope. There is a sacred rhythm in life, a pattern hidden beneath the surface of our struggles, a melody that only those who listen closely can hear. It is the rhythm that whispers every trial, every sorrow, every moment of weakness is not simply for you alone. It is preparation, training, shaping, and molding, so that one day your experience of fragility becomes the conduit for healing, hope, and strength in the lives of others. Weakness is not only a teacher of personal endurance, it is the tender hand that shapes empathy, the quiet forge that creates compassion, the gentle current that readies the soul to uplift. When we endure hardship, when our hearts are heavy, when our hands tremble under the weight of life, we are learning lessons that cannot be taught in classrooms, cannot be learned in books, cannot be gained through achievement alone. These are lessons of humanity, of connection, of the profound understanding that life is not always fair, and that sometimes the greatest strength is not in what we achieve, but in what we endure and then share. Weakness is the teacher, and through it we learn to recognize the pain, the longing, the fragility in others. Consider the power of touch, the comfort of a listening ear, the gentle words spoken to one who is weary. Those acts, small though they may seem, are rooted in understanding. An understanding born from your own experience of weakness carries a weight that no textbook can provide. When you have felt the sting of despair, when you have trembled in uncertainty, when you have cried into the night, you are uniquely positioned to offer hope. Weakness equips you to serve because service requires empathy, and empathy requires that you have walked through the fire yourself. Weakness teaches humility, and humility prepares you to uplift without judgment, without superiority, without expectation of return. When you have known your own limitations, you are less likely to impose yours upon others. When you have faced your own fragility, you are more patient with the fragility of others. This is the divine paradox. It is through our brokenness that we learn to build, through our own suffering that we learn to comfort, through our own need that we learn to give. When we speak of serving others, we often think of grand gestures, acts that make headlines, that earn recognition, that bring applause. But the service born from weakness is quieter, more profound. It is in the whispered prayer for someone's healing, the patient hand guiding another through difficulty, the listening presence that says, "I see you, I understand, I am here." Weakness refines the soul to perceive the subtle needs that the world often overlooks. And it is precisely this perception that transforms ordinary acts into extraordinary ministry. Every challenge you have faced, every moment of doubt, every period of uncertainty becomes a testimony of endurance. And testimonies are not meant for the shelf of memory. They are meant to be shared, to guide, to uplift, to inspire. The experiences that once caused pain now become instruments of grace. The wounds that seem to weaken you now empower you to reach out, to carry, to lift. Your story becomes a bridge, connecting heart to heart, spirit to spirit, one human being to another. Weakness prepares you to serve by cultivating patience. When you have experienced the slow grind of healing, the painstaking effort of recovery, the painstaking process of waiting for answers, you understand that others too move at their own pace. You offer space, you offer understanding, you offer gentleness. And in that gentleness, strength flows not from domination, not from authority, but from presence. Presence is a gift, and it is often the most powerful gift a person can receive. Consider the ripple effect of shared strength. When someone who has endured suffering speaks words of encouragement to one who is struggling, the power of that encounter cannot be measured. Weakness transforms experience into empathy, empathy into guidance, and guidance into empowerment. By allowing ourselves to be shaped by our vulnerabilities, we gain the capacity to lift others in ways that are authentic, sustaining, and enduring. The greatest teachers are not always those who have never fallen, but those who have, and have risen with insight to offer others. Service born from weakness is patient. It does not demand change on someone else's timetable. It recognizes that each heart heals differently, that each spirit grows uniquely, and that each journey is sacred. The person who has been forged in the crucible of weakness can wait with hope, can guide with understanding, can love without expectation. This is the strength that does not tire, the courage that does not falter, the compassion that does not wane. Weakness also fosters courage in others. When people see that someone who has experienced trials can rise, can endure, can shine, it inspires them to face their own struggles. The courage you exhibit is not flamboyant. It is steadfast, quiet, resilient. And it is in that steadiness that others find their own footing, their own voice, their own resolve. By embracing your vulnerability, you give permission for others to embrace theirs. There is also a sacred reciprocity in serving others through weakness. As you uplift, you are uplifted. As you comfort, you are comforted. As you guide, you are guided. The act of giving, born from the lessons of your own fragility, completes a circle of grace. You discover that strength is not finite, it multiplies when shared. And this realization transforms weakness from a personal burden into a communal blessing. Weakness prepares you to serve because it humbles you to the truth that life is interconnected. One cannot exist in isolation. We are bound together by our shared experiences, our shared vulnerabilities, and our shared need for grace. When you understand this truth deeply, your acts of service are not performative. They are rooted in authenticity, in love, in the recognition that what you have been through is now a tool to heal and uplift. The world often mistakes weakness for failure, but those who have learned its lessons know the truth. Weakness is the forge of empathy, the foundation of service, the birthplace of compassion. Every challenge, every sorrow, every moment of trembling is a preparation. And when you reach outward to lift another, when you offer hope where despair dwells, when you extend your hand to guide the weary, you embody the highest purpose of human experience. Weakness also deepens listening. When you have known despair, you can hear the unspoken cries of others. When you have felt helplessness, you can sense the silent struggles around you. This heightened awareness allows your service to be targeted, precise, meaningful. You do not offer platitudes, you offer presence. You do not give advice lightly, you give understanding. You do not simply witness suffering, you participate in easing it. Service born from weakness requires courage, humility, and perseverance. It asks that you show up, even when it is difficult, even when recognition is absent, even when the work is demanding. It demands that you remember that your experiences, once sources of pain, are now instruments of healing. Your vulnerability becomes a sacred tool. Your compassion becomes a bridge. Your resilience becomes a guide. And there is a sacred joy in this service. For when weakness is transformed into uplift, when fragility becomes a channel for strength, when suffering becomes the soil for compassion, the soul experiences a fullness that triumph alone cannot provide. There is a deep satisfaction, a profound peace, a quiet exultation in knowing that your life, with all its brokenness and beauty, has been used to illuminate the path for others. Weakness prepares you to serve and uplift others by teaching the most difficult lessons of all: patience, empathy, humility, courage, and love. These lessons cannot be learned in ease, nor in comfort, nor in success. They are forged in the fires of experience, tempered in the crucible of suffering, polished in the quiet reflection of the heart. And once learned, they are gifts you carry into the lives of others, extending the grace you have received and transforming the pain you once felt into the power to heal. So when your spirit feels weak, when your hands tremble, when your heart aches, remember that these are not signs of inadequacy. They are signs of preparation. They are shaping you for service. They are cultivating within you the capacity to lift, to heal, to inspire, and to guide. Every trial endured, every moment of fragility embraced, every prayer whispered in weakness becomes a stepping stone toward the sacred work of uplifting others. And when you reach out to another who is struggling, when you offer your hand, your heart, your understanding, you will see the miraculous truth that weakness, once feared, has become your greatest strength. That through it you are not only standing, but you are standing for others. That through it you are not only healed, but you are a healer. That through it you are not only surviving, but you are illuminating the path for all who follow. The beauty of weakness is that it does not end in despair. It ends in purpose. It ends in preparation. It ends in service. And through service, it transcends the self and becomes a conduit for divine love, an instrument of hope, a living testament that the human heart, when shaped by experience and aligned with God, can carry not only its own burdens, but also the burdens of others, and in doing so, transform the world. Weakness is never wasted. Fragility is never final. Suffering is never solitary. Every tear, every tremor, every moment of doubt is being carefully woven into a story far larger than your own. And when you step forward ready to serve, ready to uplift, ready to pour your heart into the lives of others, you become living proof that God's work is not only in our triumphs, but profoundly, beautifully, eternally, in our weaknesses made whole.